Moneyweb TV on the Executive Exchange is the South African Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago. Well, thank you so much for your time. I thought we should start with something slightly different today, Governor, and perhaps just to bring all of our listeners and viewers into the conversation is to get your day in the life of the South African Reserve Bank Governor in the current environment. What does your day look like? Can we start there?
Well, it's a life of uncertainty, and you wake up either in the middle of the night or in the early hours of the morning, and you try to check what has changed because it has an impact on what we've got to decide on, and there are so many moving parts, and but what we had been clear are the channels through which we think South Africa would be impacted. As the central bank, we clearly do not analyze the politics, we analyze the economics, and we say, okay, there is a spike in the oil price. What does it mean for the global economy? What does that mean for South Africa? How is South Africa different? And so every time there are factors that drive what happened to the oil price, I have to be on top of those and understand in which direction they are going. That's the one channel. The other channel, of course, is the exchange rate channel, which is impacted by capital flows. And I'm telling you this because you said, how is it in the life of the central bank? And I am looking at these things before I even leave my house.
Now, how effective is domestic monetary policy when we look at those external inflation drivers? You mentioned the oil price that makes you wake up at midnight. Talk to me a little bit about the effectiveness of monetary policy in this polycrisis world, Governor.
Well, I would put it this way. We are in the middle of a global storm. You build the defenses before the storm arrives. If you're trying to build the defenses in the middle of the storm, you are too late. And so let us look at South Africa and say, where are we with monetary policy? And one will say to you that the South African monetary policy framework last year went through its most fundamental reform in 25 years. And it had to do with the lowering of the inflation target. And what that meant was that we got inflation expectations converging towards the target. That is a buffer that we have, which means that when the storms hit us and prices begin to rise, you have the cushion. Because you have got the cushion, you are also able to either see through the shocks and respond as appropriate. And so we have got a robust monetary policy framework where we had, as the starting point, inflation at target. You have a position where fiscal had put buffers, and getting into the crisis, the fiscal had buffers. And you have in South Africa an environment where the structural reform program has progressed and it eliminated some of the constraints, and we are making progress in terms of the ones that are lagging behind. And that laid the basis for South Africa getting into this shock to be able to weather through the storm. It doesn't mean we will not be affected. All that we're saying is that we are getting into this storm from a stronger position.
How big do you think this storm is going to be? Do you think it could be tantamount to a tornado?
Well, we don't have tornadoes in South Africa, so it's difficult for me to compare the storm and the tornado. All that I can say is that it is significant, and What are we seeing? We are seeing forecasters globally revising the forecast for global economic growth, saying that the impact of this is that it's going to lead to lower growth. Secondly, that is going to lead to rising inflation. And for us as central bankers, our task is to understand the nature of the shock and whether the shock is of a transitory nature or whether it is of a persistent nature. If it is transitory, we see through the shock and we only respond to the second round effects. If it becomes persistent, or in the words that you put, a polyshock, if it becomes persistent, then you are having to calibrate policy differently, and it has got to be timeously. And when I'm saying timeously, I'm deliberately using the term timeously because you can't afford to be preemptive, but you can also not afford to be late.
The indications right now, are they that this is transitory, or do you think of a more persistent nature?
Well, as things stand, our reading is that it is transitory, but we also, in the most recent policy meeting, cautioned that we have got to be able to be alive to the outlook, the risks attended to the outlook, and be guided by incoming data. So as the data comes through, as we learn more and more about the crisis, our assessment of transitory or persistent could change.
Are you bracing yourself potentially for one of the bigger episodes in your term as governor? I mean, you've been through many different crises. Where would you categorize this at this stage? Obviously, we know it's fluid, Governor, as you say, and you're continuing to monitor. But is it one of the biggest?
Well, I can't say it is the biggest, but it is definitely big. When we were hit by COVID, for many of our generation, COVID was once in a lifetime kind of thing. The last time you had an impact like that was the Spanish flu in 2018. There are precedents for the oil shock. We had it in the 70s. We had it in 1991, 92 with the Iraq war. We are experiencing it now. And every time the oil price gets in at a particular level, and then once you said, oh, is that where it is? Is it locked? Then it comes down. And what is different between this crisis and the previous was that the previous one, you had a spike in the oil price, and then it was there for some time, then it came down. And here, there is a lot of noise that on any given day, there are indications that could drive the price up in the morning, and by the afternoon, things are driving it down. And getting through to read that noise is what is challenging for forecasters and policymakers.
Beyond the drama that we're seeing on the ground and numerous petrol stations running dry, what is the reality in terms of oil supplies? Is there calmness that prevails at a policy level, given what you are privy to and the conversations that you are privy to?
Well, we have not had the conversations with the department that is responsible for this, but we have been in engagement with players in the market, and there are emerging interesting trends. There is an indication that some of the stations and some of the suppliers are holding back on the stock because tomorrow they can sell it at a higher price. And so the indications that we are getting is not that at the moment, it might happen at some stage, but at the moment, we do not have a shortage of the product, but that the product is almost being held back somehow. And again, I'm saying this carefully because it is something that we cannot confirm. But this is what the indication that we are getting from some of the players in the industry.
Governor, I want to move on to a slightly different conversation. at this stage, and that is to understand your leadership style within the South African Reserve Bank. Have people asked you how you classify your leadership?
Well, people ask, and I actually have a problem, because then people start to box leaders. Others would say that they are this, or they are resonant, they are that and that. And for me, every situation is different and calls for different action. There is one thing that cannot be taken away if you are a public institution, and it is that of ethics and acting ethically. So we can talk of having an ethical leadership here, but what I'd say to you is the following: is that I do not believe, and you can characterize it in whichever way and say, we think you are this kind of a leader. I do not believe that leaders should mold the institutions in their own image. And so my approach to leadership in the Reserve Bank had always been to rally the team at the Reserve Bank to formulate a coherent strategy to deliver on our mandate. So that one day when I am not here and there is another governor, it not be that let us get rid of the Lesetja Kganyago strategy, but that as an institution, this is what we arrived at. This is our strategy as an institution to execute our mandate. Put simply, leaders must build institutions such that institutions outlive them, instead of molding the institutions in their own image. And that is my approach to leadership.
What would you say if you had the opportunity to yourself as incoming governor back in 2014? You obviously had been with the institution from 2011 as a deputy governor, but when you went and you took the hot seat, if you had the opportunity to give yourself advice, what would that be?
For me, given what I was telling you about the approach to leadership, the leadership journey starts with listening. And you've got to be hearing what people are saying as you chart the way going forward. I would like to say to you that I took the advice of the people when we started this. We formulated a strategy, and it was an inclusive process, and we had lots of lessons along the way, and corrected course where we have to correct course. And I can say to you that sitting here today, that there had been lots of central banks that had been visiting us here in Pretoria, wanting to know, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? And that for me is testimony to the respect that the institution has in the matters of central banking. And that's why people keep on coming to us and asking how we are doing things around here.
Governor, you've fought fiercely for the independence of the South African Reserve Bank, but at the same time, you need to maintain the status quo with many, many different stakeholders. Advice to other leaders who are navigating similar complexities?
But fortunately, I didn't have to fight for the independence of the Reserve Bank. The independence of the Reserve Bank is enshrined in the Constitution. All that I had to do was to protect that independence and make sure that the institution lives true to its constitutional mandate. And since the Reserve Bank is a creature of the Constitution, I guess if I have to give advice, it would be to give advice to other entities that are a creature of the Constitution or a creature of a statute. And the advice is very simple. Understand your constitutional and legislative mandate, execute it to the best of your ability, and do not allow yourself to be distracted. For me, the lesson is very plain and simple. That institutions and we have had many institutions that are creatures of the Constitution or statute that got gutted, others got weakened, others almost got destroyed completely. That the way to destroy the institution is not so much to attack the institution, but to actually get the institution to be led by pliable individuals who do not live to the constitutional and legislative mandate of that institution. That is where the problem emanates from.
Moving on to general South Africans and their perception of the South African Reserve Bank, do you believe that they have an understanding of the importance you play in protecting their status going forward? And when I say status, I'm talking about maintaining stability, financial stability, monetary policy stability, and how that feeds into the broader economy and to the financial health of every single South African.
Well, we engage South Africans from all walks of life. We engage parliamentarians. We engage the public through the monetary policy forums. We engage market players. We are busy now with an engagement with the price setters. And that, when I'm talking about price setters, we engage with the trade unions. We engage with companies that determine prices. We engage with the regulators that set prices in the regulated sector. We explain what our role is and what we are trying to achieve and why it is important. And importantly, how our role and our mandate actually impacts on them. So if you take any sector, let's say you take electricity, for example, and you engage with NERSA and you engage with ESCOM, and you say, yes, it is very important that there is security of supply of electricity. It's very important that you have got a stable grid and a well-resourced ESCOM and so forth. But can we also understand that for ESCOM to do what it is doing, or for Transnet or for any other of these entities, they also have to access borrowed money. And the point of departure in the cost of borrowing is what the inflation rate is. And so you other price setters, if you do not come to the party in getting inflation low, what you are actually doing is that you are increasing your own borrowing costs. So can we find each other here? And so you've got to link the price stability mandate to the responsibility that the price setters are actually having. For the South African public, for me, I have never met any member of the public who is prepared to pay more for any good or service. Not one. And if the public does not want to pay more for goods and services, that means that we should have price stability. Of course, there is an extreme form of price stability where it says that, well, what we know is that if the public is paying X for this good this year, they expect to pay the same next year. Put simply, the public today would prefer last year's prices than this year's prices if last year's prices were lower. But you can't have zero inflation. So the only way in which you can then achieve the price stability is to have an inflation rate that is low enough that the inflation rate is taken out of the decision-making processes of the price setters and the price takers, because it is understood that there is an institution that maintains price stability and will keep inflation low and stable.
I know I'm running out of time with you, but I've just got two more questions. And the first one is, what has been the most rewarding aspect, or is the most rewarding aspect for you in leading the South African Reserve Bank?
The knowledge that I am at the service of our people. And I know I am not speaking for myself alone. I am speaking for the great men and women of the South African Reserve Bank, who every day, when they wake up and they come to this institution, they are driven by one thing: serving the South Africans. And serving the South Africans meant that we execute the mandate that the South Africans had given us. And the primary mandate they gave us is that the South Africans would like to have price stability. And we have got to deliver that, because it is that price stability that is in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth in South Africa.
If it's appropriate, Governor, could we close on perhaps a forward-looking statement from yourself on the economic path ahead for South Africans from your perspective?
The economic path ahead is uncertain. All that I can say is that we have got to brace ourselves for the uncertainty. We're going to have to make the decisions on the basis of the best information at our disposal at any particular point in time. It's a very fluid, changing environment. But for South Africa, we entered into this uncertain environment with buffers. We entered this on a more solid basis than we were when we entered the COVID crisis. That counts for something. And in a way, maybe also explains why you saw that we had an impact, but the adjustments in whether the cost of borrowing or the exchange rate has not been as pronounced as we saw in 2020. And it's got to do with the fact that we got into this crisis with solid buffers.
I started off by saying, what does the day in the life of the governor look like? What does the evening look like as we get to the close of today? What is the rest of this day hold for you, Governor?
Well, I've got to look back on the day and what it means for tomorrow. But as South Africans close off, the Western Hemisphere is coming in. There are things that are happening in the Western Hemisphere that would impact on the environment tomorrow. And we have got to be alive to that. So before I would go to bed, I would have observed what is going on in the Western Hemisphere. And then I wake up and I must check what happened whilst I was asleep. And as we wake up, the Asians are coming in, and we have got to see what are their reactions to the changed environment. You have got to be constantly watching what is going on, and which is why we kept on saying that our reaction to this shock will be guided by the outlook, an assessment of the balance of risks, and the incoming data, because we act on the basis of the data that we have.
Governor, thank you so much for making time for us in your busy schedule. I've been chatting to the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Lesetja Kganyago.